Komang, Charlie Smith, Jong Benji, Georgia Strait. I'm Charlie Smith, editor of the Georgia Strait, and it's great to be back for another week on WOW TV. I'm going to start by discussing a story that I was in the middle of, and that is a lawsuit that was filed against the Georgia Strait by John Furlong. And as many of you will remember, John Furlong was the chief executive officer of the Vancouver Olympics, one of the more famous people in British Columbia. But what happened was in 2011, after the Olympics were over, he published a book, his memoir, Patriot Hearts. And what he reported in that book was how he came to become CEO of the Olympics, some of his life in Ireland. But he neglected to include an important chapter in his life, which was a 5-year period from 1969 to 1974, some of which he was in British Columbia. And he moved to Burns Lake in 1969 as a missionary and a volunteer teacher at the Immaculata Elementary School, and he was teaching gym. Well, what happened during those years, according to some of the students, that they were alleging that he was a very rough gym teacher. So we published a story on that, written by Laura Robinson, in September of 2012, basically talking about how Mr. Furlong omitted his secret past. And it included the allegations from former students, 8 of whom swore affidavits. And Mr. Furlong, as people who've been following the story in British Columbia are aware, he went crazy and he held a news conference, he attacked the paper, he attacked the writer. He came back the following week with another statement. Later, after replies were filed by the writer Laura Robinson and by the Georgia Strait, myself and Dan McLeod, he issued another statement was issued by his family condemning the writer. And then this week he started giving another series of interviews. And what's happened is that he's saying he's escalating his lawsuit against the writer, but he has dropped his lawsuit against the Georgia Strait, myself, and Dan McLeod. And in a technical sense, what he's done has issued a notice of discontinuance. What that means is that the lawsuit is basically in abeyance. It could be revived, but it seems very unlikely because he's indicated that he has released the Georgia Strait. The fact of the matter is that we had assembled a very powerful defense against this lawsuit. We had also required that Laura Robinson obtain affidavits from people that she was quoting in the story. So on the one hand, Mr. Furlong can go around on various media outlets and say he's escalating his lawsuit, but at the same time, what he's really done is dropped a lawsuit against myself and the Georgia Strait and Dan McLeod. Now, another story that we were following this week was the situation with post-secondary education in British Columbia. David Eby is the new NDP critic for advanced education, and he's also the MLA who represents the UBC's Point Grey campus. And one of the things David was talking about in an interview that I had with him was how the government's budget transparency legislation actually makes it very difficult for universities and colleges to borrow money, because the money that they borrow is included in the public sector debt, i.e. the government debt, even if it's self-supporting. So as an example, David Eby was saying that SFU, for instance, has family housing that is in need of replacement, but it can't borrow the money without the provincial government's consent, even though the rents from the housing will pay for the cost of the mortgage over time. Similar situation with the SFU Student Society. They would like to borrow money. They can generate revenue to pay off the debt for their building, but they can't get the guarantees in place that would enable them to get the regular interest rates. And this is a problem affecting many colleges and universities, and it's partly because the Premier, Christy Clark, she's promised to create a debt-free BC, but what it's really done, according to David Eby, is handcuffed the universities and colleges. In the government's defense, what's happening is it is implementing recommendations of the Public Sector Auditing Board, and that's the organization that creates generally accepted accounting principles. And it's also been urged on the government by the Auditor General. But the flip side, as David Eby points out, is that the Auditor General often wants other things for the government to do. And an example was a recent report on the Pacific Carbon Trust, but that doesn't actually happen. Another big story involving universities is the continued hunt for someone who is perpetrating sexual assaults on the UBC Point Grey campus. And since April, there have been 6 assaults. Police were talking, the RCMP. It's actually, UBC campus is policed by the RCMP, and they believe that these assaults are all linked, and it could be the same perpetrator. And because of the nature of these assaults, there's a belief that it could even be, it's somebody very familiar with the campus, could be a student, could be an employee, or just somebody who spends a lot of time out at UBC. So people are taking precautions. The university has beefed up protection for women on campus. There's a lot more security. One of the issues with crimes at UBC, on the UBC Point Grey campus, is because it's not part of the city of Vancouver, it doesn't come under the jurisdiction of the Vancouver Police, which is unfortunate because the Vancouver Police has its own sexual assault squad and is also very much on top of what's happening in the area adjacent to UBC. So if there is a predator out there, and it sure sounds like there is, it's an interesting choice for him to conduct his crimes on the university campus. So, and we'll see where this thing goes, but it's creating a lot of anxiety out at UBC because it's a very large campus, quite sprawling with significant distances for some of the students to walk. And now that daylight savings is over, there's also the issue of darkness and also the transit issue, that there's no rapid transit to UBC, so people take a bus. They get off at a bus loop. There's a couple of bus loops on campus, and then they have to walk to their destination, which can be quite far away. So this is a major issue that the RCMP and campus officials are trying to address.